This is a 9-minute documentary about Southend-on-Sea in Essex. Southend is typical of many other seaside towns in the UK. It attracts a large number of visitors on sunny days like this, who go there for the sun, the ice cream, or the fish and chips and the amusements. In days gone by, Southend was famous for bank holiday fights between the Rockers and the Mods, but today they park side by side, and a different set of wheels are popular. Typically of seaside towns, one of the main attractions for visitors are the amusements, and especially for the fearless are the white knuckle rides, like this. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I know all this. It's just like any other seaside town. So what can you tell me in the remaining 8 minutes that could possibly be interesting? Well, it features in the 1964 film Goldfinger, when James Bond followed Goldfinger to Southend Airport. It has a funicular railway, although it's not working at the moment, and it's the largest town in Essex. However, that's not the biggest thing about Southend. I'm going to share with you something that is really big. In fact, it's enormous. Something that makes Southend quite unique, not just in Britain, but in the world. And behind its enormity is a fascinating history. I'm talking about the Southend Pier. Despite several major fires, a ship crashing into it, the ravages of time, and the loss of holidaymakers to warmer countries, unlike so many other British piers, it's still there. It's hard to get a good visual perspective of the pier. Even this shot doesn't do it justice. And the reason for that is because it's so long. In fact, it's over 1.25 miles. It's the world's longest pleasure pier. Like so many buildings at today's seaside resorts, it has seen better days. But this particular building does have a genuine excuse. It's over 130 years old. Its history goes back to the early 1800s, when factory workers would leave the grime and dirt of the towns and the cities to escape for a few days at the seaside, where they could bathe in the clear sea waters, stroll in the clean sand, and take the fresh air. Brighton was popular with Londoners, who could easily access it using the new railway, and Margate on the Kent coast was easily reached by the large ferryboats from the Docklands. These would travel along the Thames estuary, sailing right past Southend and then on to Margate. Although Southend has sandy beaches, it suffers in that the sea recedes by over 1 mile at low tide. And even at high tide, the water near the coast is still too shallow for the bigger ferryboats to get close to the shore. And unlike Brighton, at that time, the railway didn't reach the town. Not wanting to miss out on becoming a popular seaside destination, or its revenue, it was decided to construct a pier extending right out into the Thames estuary to capture all this passing trade. In 1829, a wooden pier was commissioned to solve the problem, and it became a big success. In 1887, it was decided to replace the ageing wooden pier with an iron one. This included an electric tramway running the full length of the pier, which was over 1 mile long. It was partially opened that summer and fully completed 2 years later, in 1889. The pier was built by James Brunlees. He'd built the first iron pier at Southport in 1860, a seaside resort that also had tides that travelled a long way out. Cast iron was a popular building material at the time, and because it didn't corrode in salt water, it was ideal for the construction. The decking has been repaired and replaced over the years, but most of the ironwork is still original. It's easy to imagine the excitement when Victorian visitors arrived by boat at the pier, over 1 mile from the shore. It featured a theatre and an assortment of amusements. Visitors could choose to walk or take the tram to the soft sands at the shore. The pier was such a success that demand outstripped its capabilities and was extended in 1897, and in the early 20th century further enhanced with the addition of an upper deck to the pierhead. During the Second World War, the pier was requisitioned by the Navy, and it became HMS Lee, which was the naval control centre for the Thames estuary. It was a mustering point for over 84,000 vessels during the war. Its most notable incident at the time was in 1944, when the munitions ship SS Richard Montgomery, carrying several thousand tons of munitions, slipped its moorings, became stuck on a sandbank where it broke its back. Despite salvage attempts at the time, approximately 1,500 tons of high explosives still remain there today, posing a constant risk to Southend, Sheerness and the surrounding areas. Some believe that if it detonated, it would be the biggest non-nuclear explosion in the world. At low tide, the 3 masts of the sunken ship are visible. Fortunately, government experts assure us It's probably quite safe now. So although they constantly monitor the wreck and shipping avoids it, we really shouldn't worry too much. After the war, visitors to the pier increased, peaking at 5.75 million in 1950. However, several fires during the 1950s and 60s, together with the growth of package holidays abroad, meant that by the 1970s the pier was less attractive, and it began to fall into disrepair. After its third major fire, the council decided to close the pier for good. Fortunately, the Historic Buildings Committee intervened, providing a grant to make repairs, and the restored pier, with new trains, one named after Sir John Betjeman, was opened in 1986. Such was the pier's luck, though, that only months later, the ship MV King's Abbey decided to take a shortcut right through it, causing a 70-foot gap. It wasn't fully repaired until 3 years later. However, despite all of this, and a further 2 more major fires, unlike many of its contemporaries, it still survives today. The railway operates every 30 minutes, although unfortunately there isn't a great deal to do when visitors eventually get to the end. There is the RNLI shop, which also houses the second of the 2 lifeboat stations, the other being at the shore side of the pier, and a small cafe in a very large building. It's also home to the TV cooking series Friday Night Feast, which stars Jamie Oliver. I wonder if their guests realise just how precarious it looks from the outside. Probably the best reward for getting to the end of the pier is its tranquility. It should be Southend's jewel in the crown, although these days it's looking a little bit tarnished. I wonder what those visitors from Victorian times would think if they could see it today. In its heyday, the pier attracted nearly 6 million visitors. Today it's a fraction of that, with around 300,000 visitors a year. It retains its attraction for tourists who want to experience the world's longest pleasure pier, either on foot or by using the train. At the shore end is the Pier Museum, a building housing all kinds of treasures from its past, including Victorian amusements, photographs, and restored trams and trains. It's the local volunteers and enthusiasts who are trying hard to keep the pier and its history alive. I know that time moves on, and that popularity wanes, but it does seem a bit of a tragedy that such an iconic structure, with its trains, could be lost forever, and that future generations won't appreciate the engineering that went into its construction. Built on a bed of mud and sand, or be able to travel over 1.25 miles away from the shore to enjoy the serenity that it offers. It's hard to appreciate its real size properly. This shows the extent to which the tide recedes, and also gives some idea of its stature. Whatever you think about seaside resorts, it's hard to argue with Southend Pier's quiet magnificence. Sir John Betjeman once said, "The pier is Southend, Southend is the pier." And he was right. Southend Pier really is on the edge, and the story that it tells, the history it uncovers, is one worth knowing and repeating before it's lost from these shores forever.